Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Children and Billing Update, which will be covering the Children and Family Treatment and Support Services, OLP, PSR, and CPST. To get started, we have just a few housekeeping things to go through. The slides and the recording will be posted to our website after the webinar. Please submit any questions you have via the chat. If you do not have the chat open yet, you can find it on the bottom panel, the little thought bubble. If you click that, it will open the chat on your right-hand panel. So please send any questions you have, and if time allows, presenters will respond to them. Also, we just want to remind everyone that all information and timelines are current as of today. So today, our agenda is to do a brief rate overview for Children and Family Treatment Support Services, to discuss some billing fundamentals, and then to discuss the transition period and the transition manual, and then we will be doing some updates and clarifications that have come into play since our last billing training in July. And here is just a reminder of the scheduled dates for when each of the Children and Family Treatment and Support Services are going live. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donna Cater, who will be covering the rate overview.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the rates that I want to talk about and how the billing works that I want to talk about are for OLP, psychosocial rehab, community psychiatric treatment and supports, or CFTSS. And the first thing is to understand the regions. These regions were created, they may not be exactly what you're used to seeing, but these are a positive thing because these were created with OPWDD and OMH, and in discussions with them about aligning regions that match other regions in the state. We do 4 managed care regions over at the Department of Health, and so the easiest thing for us was to combine 2 and 2, and that's what we did to come up with these downstate and upstate regions, which means that Sullivan and Ulster are in the downstate region, which are the 2 that are normally not seen in the downstate, but we have the 5 boroughs of New York City: Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland, Putnam, Orange, Ulster, Dutchess, and Sullivan, all downstate, and then the rest of the state is upstate. And in determining whether you should be using upstate or downstate, it is the rate for specific service. The rate is determined by the location of the administrative office of the provider. That's important too. It's not where the service is happening, it's the administrative office of the provider, where it is located and where it is reported on cost reports. That is where you would bill all services. The next is a table that has been posted out on our website for the new rates. I know the last time some of you saw these rates, there was 63 rate codes, and you requested that we pare it back to some other smaller number, but still to take into consideration all of the elements that are important. So let me just go through this chart because I hear a lot of people saying that this chart, they don't understand it. What does it all mean? I think I can explain it pretty easily. And obviously the first column has the service. The second column has the rate code that you will be using to bill the service. The third column is the rate unit. Now, rate unit is something that CMS needs. It's either an hourly, a daily, a monthly. That's what shows up in that column. That doesn't mean that that's how you bill it. That's how CMS approves it. The next 2 columns are the upstate and the downstate rates that match the rate unit. So those 3 columns all go together: the rate unit, the upstate hourly rate, and the downstate hourly rate. When it comes to billing, you will be using the rate code, which is the second column, and you will be using the billing unit. So we have hourly rates, but we bill them in 15-minute increments or 5-minute increments, or that's all that's on there is the 15 minutes or the 5-minute increments. And what you're going to be billing is what's in the last two columns. So the first columns that show the hourly rate and the hourly, upstate hourly rate and downstate hourly rate are for CMS purposes. And for your purposes, it's the billing units, which are the last three columns, and the rate code column. And the reason we put these is because when we get rates approved by CMS, and these are still draft because CMS has to approve them, so does Division of Budget. So when we get rates approved by CMS, they're approving a link, they press on the link, and they want to see that their hourly rate and what the hourly rates are. So rather than having two different charts and you as providers going to one place and CMS going to another, you all go to the same chart. The provider uses the last three columns for the billing unit, for upstate billing rate or downstate billing rate, and CMS would be approving the hourly rates and the unit of service of hourly. I'm not going to go through all of the rates because they're posted out there. You can see them. They're pretty self-explanatory as to how they're used. The one big highlight that I will talk about is the off-site in all cases. So if we're using OLP as an example, we would, if you are providing OLP individual and it is off-site, you'll see that there is an off-site rate code, and you would be billing the off-site rate code, and you would be billing the service. You would bill one off-site rate code when you are providing the off-site service, and you would be billing as many 15 minutes as you provided the service for. So that's two rate codes that you would be billing for that service, rather than many off-sites. You bill one, and that gives you your off-site service. And again, it's in 15-minute increments. So those two things need to match. I'm sure that the off-site is going to have questions, but when you are billing off-site, you bill the service, and you bill off-site, and you bill them in the same increments. The next slide is oh, I'm sorry, let me go back one. So the first slide is the first 6 months. It is from January 1/19 to June 30/19, and those rates are a little bit higher. They include the startup in them, and that is for the first 6 months. And then the next slide is for the next 6 months, which is slightly higher than what is calculated, and CMS again has to approve the startup rates as well as the service rates, and they're all set up exactly the same. You bill a service code, rate code. You bill it in 15-minute increments or 5-minute increments. For one service there is 5-minute increments. And you bill off-site. If you are off-site, you bill that for 15-minute increments as well. And then my last slide is the slide for what the rates will be on January 1, 2020. And these are at full implementation. And again, it's the same rate codes, so you'll be used to using the same rate codes. You'll be used to using 15-minute increments. The rate will just change for the last January 1, 2020. So I think we're holding questions till the end. So I need to now hand this off to Boris, who will be taking over the next part of the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Caitlin, for the information. Yes, and we are holding off till the end to answer questions. I will remind folks again to please chat your questions in, and then we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Also, and I'll repeat this at the end, we have a slide on this. We are also holding office hours, both for billing and So if we are not able to get to some of the questions today due to the timing, we'll be hosting that hour next week, I believe. But again, I'll repeat that and give more information on that as well at the end of this presentation. So in addition to the rate overview that Donna just took us through, we also wanted to provide an overview of some of the additional information that has come out since we did our last presentation, and also also provide some of the reminders to the folks. So again, the billing manual and rates are available, and as mentioned by Caitlin, we will be posting these slides. So all of the things you see in blue that says access here, you'll be actually able to access that through the link directly, all the manuals and the rates. And again, as a reminder, the requirements are providers must be designated to provide the services we're talking about. And today we're focusing on the 3 specific services that were mentioned. So again, the providers need to be designated. They also need to enroll in Medicaid as part of the requirements, and also must, of course, contract with the managed care plan, with the Medicaid managed care plans, and also go through credentialing to be considered fully in-network. Again, you need to contract and credential. And it is critical that providers claims test. So that's the thing you'll probably hear us say the most throughout this presentation, and we'll keep encouraging folks to continue if you have started claim testing, and if not, continue or start the claim testing with managed care, and make sure you reach out to them to begin the process. Again, the network requirements on the managed care side are important to understand. As always, managed care does have a network adequacy requirement. But I think one of the things that we want to also highlight is the whole notion of continuity of care, and that managed care must allow provider to continue to treat an enrollee for up to 24 months, even as out-of-network basis, and managed care must be notified before claim submission. So even if you don't have a contract with somebody on January 1st, but it's an individual or family or child that's transitioning, and we'll talk a little more about transitioning cases in January, it's still important that you work with managed care directly and notify them and work through this. And you will need to sign a single case agreement, which is important for the out-of-network basis. Of course, if you have a full contract and you're credentialed and you're in-network, you don't have to worry about this. This really only applies if during the transition you don't have a contract yet in place and you're still working out. So just wanted to highlight that. Important. And the other piece, in addition to claim testing, what we'll keep highlighting as well is communication, meaning talking to the plans, and for plans to talk to the providers as well, as much as possible. And I think that's where we see true success happen, is when both providers and plans talk to each other and at the same time test claims as much as possible prior to go live. One of the recap or one of the reminders for just the billing fundamentals, it is important to know that every claim at a minimum, this is not the only piece that's required in the claim clearly. One is you would need to use either 837I as an electronic version or UB04 as a paper claim format. which has been consistent for a number of years now in many transitions into managed care. You will need to use the rate codes, and as Donna pointed out, there's a list of them, both in manuals and in this presentation. You also will need to use the valid CPT codes, which has also been provided, and we'll go through some of the other charts later in the presentation. Modifiers are going to be an important component of these, to especially distinguish between different services. And units of service, as Donna mentioned, there's 15-minute increments or 5-minute increments, so you would need to specify how many units you're billing for. This is one of the tools that we provide through MIGTAC. We refer to it as a billing tool. Again, we have a link here, so when you get access to these slides, you'll be able to access them. This tool actually goes field by field of the UB04, and it's a hover over field, and we keep updating as we get new information both from the plans and the state to keep making sure that this tool is up to date. But this is very helpful if you're not sure what needs to go in a particular field, or some of the questions you have, if it's required, not required. I know both plans and providers use this a lot, so we just wanted to highlight that and reminded folks that it's out there, and we'll keep updating it as we get new information. So the other piece that I want to underscore what Donna said is offsite claims, and we'll repeat it one more time towards the end, because that's we get a lot of questions on this, and it is a little different than in some of the other services that you might be providing. And in this instance, if you are providing, and actually it's very much encouraged that CFTSS services are provided off-site, so hopefully you will be providing them off-site. So when you do this, you're actually going to be submitting 2 claims. Again, Donna mentioned this, we just want to underscore this. You will submit a claim with the rate code that indicates the service you provided, and with the CPT codes and everything that's included. And you also will submit a corresponding claim with an off-site rate code. Again, that was highlighted earlier. And it's important that you do that so you can get reimbursed for the additional costs for providing services off-site. Both claims have to have procedure CPT codes. And as much as possible, and it all will depend, of course, on your electronic system or billing system capability, as much as possible, there's a way you can link that and make sure that, from the compliance and the quality perspective, that those are somehow related in your system, of course, would be, will help out with the compliance piece, and also help make sure, in some instances, that you're actually billing for offsite when offsite happened, and not losing out on potential revenue here. So again, important to remember that as you build this out. This is just a chart to basically say that's the same thing, but more in the visual effect. And we do mention here on-site, just wanted to highlight on-site and off-site. But again, I think it's important to remind folks and underscore that these services are really meant to be provided off-site, out in the community, individuals' homes, and so forth. So even though on-site is allowed, and that's why we provide guidance in regards to the difference between the two from the billing perspective, I can't say enough about making sure that that you focus on really trying to provide these services off-site. But again, this talks about when you submit one claim versus when you submit 2 claims in each instance. The other tool I think it's important to highlight, and we still get a lot of questions, especially when it comes to contracting, but also billing, is who do I call at managed care? How do I get information on that? What we have is the managed care matrix tool that we work closely with all 18 plans throughout the state and with New York State on making sure that it's up to date. And we constantly get updates from all the plans in regards to this information. And it is very helpful and useful, especially when you're trying to figure out who to call, how do you reach somebody in managed care. As you can see, this is just a snapshot of a particular area, and all the tabs we have everything from general to billing to utilization management and so forth. So if you are not sure who to call, or who to reach out, or how do you even get a phone number for a managed care organization. It's really on this tool. It's broken up by the RPC regions. You also could look it up by county. So there's many different ways to access it, or even by plan name. And then it will provide you with all of the contact information you need. It has additional information as well, and not just the contact information. So let's talk a little bit about transitional billing. That's one of the important elements that comes up. And as a reminder, a supplemental billing manual is available. It includes guidance on transitional billing procedures and so forth. It's specifically focused, as I mentioned earlier, for those services and families that are transitioning from the current waiver to the one of the three services on January 1st. So we just wanted to make sure folks knew that there was a manual out there, and some of the highlights that we'll be pulling out today to talk about. Again, there are some services that are moving from the waiver, from 1915C waiver to the Medicaid State Plan Authority on January 1st, and the three services, again, that we're focusing on are OLP, CPST, and PSR. So continuity of care requirements are instrumental and are very much, in mind, and making sure that folks do not, stop receiving services as this transition happens. And again, so one of the big components that the state instituted is this 90-day period of, the authorization, the utilization management and authorization requirements will not be required and are not allowed during the first 90 days for this, but again, focusing on OLP, CPST, and PSR. And so it's important to highlight that the first 90 days are important. I would, though, underscore back to the whole communication piece. I think it's still very important that you communicate with the plans, make sure that they're working with you and you're working with them during this period as you transition or get new individuals into these services, and that they are aware of who you're serving as their membership. And there's many different reasons why you want to do that. So just because it's not a requirement, which is a great way to start this process and release some of the barriers and pressures, but I still think it's important that folks communicate and talk to each other. And again, all the managed care plans are required to offer contracts to all designated providers, within, especially the waiver ones. So it really falls onto the providers to make sure that you move the contracting forward. In our experience with some of the other transitions that we've had, we've seen on numerous times where managed care has offered contracts, but unfortunately, for one reason or another, providers chose not to sign those contracts. But from the requirement, the Medicaid managed care plans are required to offer contracts, and I think that's also great. So what are the fundamental differences when you kind of move forward with this transition between managed care billing and kind of the fee-for-service or Medicaid billing? Again, as we talked about, authorization, notification, communication is important. Making sure you're in-network provider, again, both from contracting and the credentialing side, is important. And if you're not in-network, again, can't say enough about making sure you talk to the plan and get a single case agreement for the individuals you're serving, so this way you can get paid for them during this transition period. And of course, as always, and I think most of you, if not all of you, have been doing this already, continuing to use e-PASES and other mechanisms to track enrollment in Medicaid in general, but especially under managed care, making sure you know which plan the child is enrolled with. And so making sure and being on top of that, e-PASES is always, kind of the best practice. And there's many different ways of working through e-PASES on an individual basis or through batch processing, but making sure that you look and keep your eye on that, especially during this transition. And even going forward, of course, is very important. So when do you bill managed care versus fee-for-service? So, of course, if the child is enrolled in Medicaid managed care plan, you should be billing for CPST, OLP, and PSR to the managed care Medicaid plan. But wait, there is an exception, and the exception is for a period of time, and the exception is for the child who is also determined, have been determined as Social Security, eligible individual. So if the child has SSI status, it is important to note, and I think that's one of the key highlights we wanted to mention today, that for the 6 months of this period until 7/1/19, even when the child is enrolled in Medicaid managed care plan, and you might see that enrollment, but if you see that SSI status as well, you continue billing fee-for-service until July 1st of 2019. So just wanted to make sure folks got that information and understood it. It's somewhat relatively new for some of you, so I think it's important to note that and make sure that as you build out your processes, that you also make sure as you check eligibility that you notice that, especially for the period from 1/1/19 through 7/1/19. And there's also information for Medicaid managed care enrolled individuals who were born before January 1st, receiving waiver services. The crosswalk to any go live, the provider must bill the new rate. So it's important for individuals who are, are receiving services, I should say, before January 1st, that you make sure that as they transition to CFTSS. And it's important that as you can see the last bullet here, that individual services will still be billed through fee-for-service waiver until March 31st. So again, let me just say that again. For waiver services that are not transitioning on January 1st, the individual services will still be billed through fee-for-service waiver billing until March 31st, 2019. Another key component to keep in mind as you move forward and kind of try to figure out how your systems and processes work. So when to bill CFTC versus waiver services, right? So we had when to bill managed care versus fee-for-service. Now we're talking about the CFTSS versus waiver services. Again, there's a crosswalk. We'll have a couple of slides on that, and we'll talk a little bit about that crosswalk. But the 1915C services that correspond with the new CFTSS, again, the ones that are going live January 1st, will need to transition and be billed as CFTSS as of January 1st. Important piece to remember, the waiver services immediate crisis response, crisis avoidance, management and training, intensive in-home and skill building are transitioning to new CFTSS going live on January 1st. So please note of that. Providers who are not designated to provide CFTSS should begin to review the designated provider list within the county of the families they serve to develop a transition plan to transfer the family to a designated provider that can provide CFTSS, as only CFTSS designated providers can provide such services as outlined in the manual. Additionally, CFTSS as a state plan service must be provided, utilized, and billed for prior to any home and community-based services being referred to and utilized. There's a lot there. And that's why I wanted to make sure I actually read it. And as you know, I usually don't read the slides, but I think there's a couple of slides here and information that is very important to get correctly and make sure people understand. And all children must transition to new CFTSS as soon as possible, and waiver cannot be provided past March 31st, 2018. So just wanted to make sure folks got that information. And as I've mentioned already before in regards to the crosswalk, here's some examples of the crosswalk, right? So intensive in-home, crisis respite, as I just mentioned, or from the OCFS B2H side waiver, so that was the OMH side, intensive in-home or crisis avoidance management and training or immediate crisis response services are transitioning to the CPST. Skill building, both for OMH and B2H, for example, is transitioning to PSR, and OLP is really a new service. There are some crisis activities that can be provided and billed for under OLP. And if you need more information, I would suggest referencing our previous trainings on both the refresher of the services and also the in-person that we have done a number of months ago in regards to what are those crisis activities that are acceptable under OLP. So this gives you some information on the crosswalk from the waiver to the OLP and CPST and PSR services. So additional consideration for transitioning to CFTSS is important to consider as well. Again, in order to smoothly and quickly transition children to the corresponding services, the HCBS plan of care can temporarily serve as the required treatment plan for CFTSS. Again, the HCBS plan of care can serve as on a temporary basis as the treatment plan. However, the provider will be responsible for securing a recommendation from a LPHA, Licensed Practitioner of Healing Arts, for the new CFTSS as required in the service manual no later than January 18, 2019. And the provider will have until March 31st to develop the required treatment plan for all CPST and PSR. So this gives some flexibility and timing to give you a little time, or more than a little time in some instances, to really transition the families and the children into CFTSS services. So I think it's important to note this as well. And some of the other kind of charts and transitions that we wanted to highlight here. So from the OMH waiver crisis response, so this talks about, this particular slide is in reference to OMH waiver crisis response, and you can see some of the dates, right? So the new authority will be the CFTSS effective on January 1st. It would fall under CPST. Here are some of the rate codes. The rate codes you will be using, both offsite and the service code, and of course the allowable activities. And then, that will go through the March 31st, and then you have, the other rate code and transition that will kick in. So this is on the OMH side of the world. And then we have a similar kind of transition for OCFS providers, again, in regards to the immediate crisis response and the corresponding timelines, rate codes, and allowable activities as they relate to CPST and or the waiver immediate crisis response service period. So just making sure we move through the information, and I do want to make sure that we have some time left for the Q&A component of this presentation. And of course, the OLP, as mentioned before, is a new service, so that's where there's no former authority here, and some of the rate codes and allowable activities under OLP that's provided. And again, if you need more information on that, once again, please refer to previous trainings that we have done and recorded and are posted on the website. So some of the updates, staff transportation. When we did some of these trainings, we was talking about staff transportation and how to bill for that. There is an update. There will not be a separate rate code for staff transportation. Staff transportation codes have been built into the offsite rates. So, Donna mentioned earlier on of how many codes were before and the reduction of those codes. This was one area where the codes have been reduced. And I know some, from the billing process, that does make things easier. Less rate codes, less claims to worry about. So that's an important component. So staff transportation was not forgotten. It is still included. It's just processed differently now because it's built into the offsite rates instead of having its own billable rate code. As I mentioned before, once again, we're going to remind you about offsite claims and the need to build two claims, both for the service and the actual and the offsite rate as well. And again, with the chart that we kind of showed earlier, highlighting the difference between on-site and off-site. modifiers. One of the questions that we started to get a lot as the rates and the information started to come out about modifiers, it is important to note that all modifiers must be used. So in some instances, there are 3 modifiers, for an example. So when you're generating claims, you have to include all 3 modifiers. And again, the modifiers make the different services unique, and that's one of the major reasons why you need to do that. The order of the modifiers really doesn't matter. So which one comes first and second and third, for example, doesn't really matter as long as you use all 3 of them. And there are no additional modifiers to be used for billing CFTSS. For example, like evening, weekends, language other than the English modifiers. The ones that are provided in the manuals and information are the ones you should be using when generating claims and bills. And here's a chart that puts together, again, uses the information that was presented earlier with the rate codes and the services. We have added the CPT codes here that you would be using, the modifiers in this example, the unit measures, and there are limit per day on this unit measures. And so it's important to also note that, when there are, limits, and as you can see there are, and making sure you program from your compliance perspective and your tracking perspective, your system to include this. Again, these are the rate codes that were shown before and corresponding CPT codes and modifiers. All of this information is available in the manuals that we have talked about. And this is for CPST, same process in regards to the rate codes, CPT codes, and so forth. And here's we have a chart for PSR, the psychosocial rehab as well. So one of the questions that we've gotten a lot is on revenue codes, because it is a required field, and managed care do need revenue codes to pay claims. And so to this date, we have received 2 revenue codes that at least a number of plans are planning to use, and that's 900 and 911. They're also similar or in line with some of the adult revenue codes and so forth. So hopefully for your billing systems, this should not be a big lift, especially if you've been a part of other transitions. But these are standard revenue codes, so we would strongly recommend that you use these codes. And as we get additional information, if there's any additional potential codes to use, or we will make sure folks understand. But right now, either 900 or 911. Strongly recommend as you do claims testing, this is actually one of the areas you want to keep your eye out. There's a number of fields that are trigger fields, to me at least, when it comes to billing. Revenue codes is one of those, and making sure that if you are using 900, 911, or 911, that the plan you're billing is accepting them and not denying you on the revenue code. So please make sure that you communicate and have those discussions with the plans. As I mentioned before, we are going to have, and I think the registration has come out already, the Children's Billing and office hours is scheduled for November 15th at 2:30 p.m. If you have not registered yet, we would strongly recommend that you register. That is really meant for you to come with questions. So as I said, we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can today, but we do have limited time, and knowing that we will have limited time, we wanted to give folks another opportunity to really come. So the only way that hour works and is helpful for all, if folks, one, send us questions ahead of time in preparation for that office hour, or come to that office hour prepared with some of the questions, and it's an important task. We will do a brief overview, maybe with some of the frequently asked questions in the beginning of that, but maybe only spend 10 minutes on that. But we'll really be looking forward for you to ask us questions. If I haven't mentioned before, claim testing, and claim testing. Again, emphasizing how important it is, and making sure you do that and work closely with the plan on it. There's also, we have resources and links that will be available when you get this slide deck. And again, there's a lot of different links to different manuals, and also being able to be part of different listservs if you're already not, participating in any listservs. And so I'm not going to go through all of these resources, of course, and reminding folks once again about the managed care plan matrix and the billing tool. And I think with that, we do have 10 to 15 minutes, and I know we got quite a few questions so far to date. I think we're going to pivot this discussion, this presentation to questions and discussions. And I just wanted to ask folks, our state partners, if there's any particular questions you wanted to start with, or if you wanted me to ask any questions that have come through.
Yeah, this is Donna. I'd like to clarify one major one that I see coming through a lot of, and it's the offsite. And I knew there was going to be a lot of questions on this. I think the first thing is it's confusing on my rate chart. If we can go back to the rate chart for a second. I don't know if we can. Who's got the ability to do that? Okay. I think part of the confusion is that it says billing unit, and it says 15 minutes. It really should not say 15 minutes. It should say 1, and it's 1 per person. So I'm going to give you an example because somebody actually asked about PSR. So if you are providing the service PSR, it said what rate codes do I bill, and it is off-site. So in the PSR, you're going to bill for the service 7913, and if it's an hourly service, you're going to bill 4 units of 7913, and that's going to pay you for the whole hour for that service. And if it's off-site, you are going to bill 1 time for 7922. So that's how those two go together. And then if you are providing PSR as a group, you're going to bill 7914 for each person that you have in the group. And if you have a group of 5, each person is going to bill that 7914. And if you provided an hour to each person, then each person would get 4 units of 7914. If it is off-site, you would bill 7929 1 time for each person. So you would bill it 5 different times because you have 5 different people in your group. So that's how that's how the service and the off-site work together. So it's 2 claims because you have to put in a claim 7914 and 7929. The unit measure, the billing unit, they're not going to match. So if you provided, unless you provided only 15 minutes of service to to a person, then it will match. Otherwise, you're going to have some other unit on your service rate code. So it doesn't necessarily always mean they're going to match. And if you're billing off-site for OLP, there are specific OLP off-site codes, and those are different from the off-site codes of PSR. And those are also different than the off-site codes for I just said I'm very old and can't read these things. I apologize. SPSSY PST. So the last one there, they all have their own separate off-site. You can see it right in the chart. They have the service rate codes, and then each of them has their off-site rate codes to follow them. And those are what works together with, you can't just pick I'm going to pick the highest off-site rate code. It doesn't work that way. They have to go together. We are going to update this chart to take that 15 minutes off of there and that hourly off of there, and we're going to put in 1/per person so that you know that you can bill it. If a group, you do it per person. So we'll correct that for the off-site, and we're also going to correct what's in the manual and take off the unit as well, so that there's no confusion that you're billing this the same amount as you're billing the service. So I apologize for that, that confusion on the chart, but it is just one. It does say that in the narrative in the billing manual, but it doesn't, in the charts it looks a little bit different. So I wanted to clarify that one.
There is one other really important thing I think we wanted to clarify, just to make sure that we don't run out of time today, and there were questions about how to bill the services that are waiver services that crosswalk to the new Children and Family Treatment and Support Services going live in January. So if a service provided in the waiver today crosswalks to one of the three services, OLP, PSR, or CPST, going live in January, the new service, OLP, PSR, or CPST, will need to be billed beginning January 1st. There were questions about, do we have until March 31st to make this transition for billing? You do not have a period of time to adjust to the billing for that service. What you do have is a period of time to develop the treatment plan that's required for the service and to secure the LPHA recommendation. So for the LPHA recommendation, you have until January 18th, and for creating that treatment plan that's required for the Children and Family Treatment and Support Services, you have until March 31st. The state is going to be issuing a formal guidance on this, so expect to see that, but it'll also, it does detail this right on the slides that will also be posted shortly after this webinar.
So a lot of these questions, a lot of the questions that get into limits, I think we're going to answer those all at the same time in a Q&A document. And I think a lot of these are on off-site, and I hope I clarified those, the off-site. I don't see any, did you see any other ones, Melissa, that you wanted to answer?
Yeah, it's just that I think the nature of these questions, they're just very specific, so we think it might be more meaningful for you guys to see answers to your questions in writing rather than to try to answer each of these very specific questions. We're just going through trying to find any themes here. There was a question related to the 90-day UM, which if we go back to that slide, there is a 90-day period for which plans are not able to conduct any utilization management on a new service going into the benefit package. So for the three services going live in January, that 90 days is a set time period between January and April 1st. And so some providers were asking, well, if I don't start providing the service on January 1, will my 90 days start later? So the answer is no. That is a set time period for which plans are not able to conduct utilization management, and the purpose of that requirement is to allow the plans time to get familiar with the new services as part of their benefit package. We also do intend to release guidance on some of these continuity of care requirements that kind of walk through different scenarios so that this requirement and other related requirements are very clear across both the transitioning children and then children who are new to the services in January. So be on the lookout for that.
Okay, I have two here. The explanation of off-site doesn't correlate with what Donna just answered. You are 100% correct, and that's why I said we will correct the charts to make sure that the unit comes off of there, because for off-site you are billing one per person. So we will correct that, we will correct the manual, and then everything will match. And then another question, so whether a PSR group was done on-site or off-site, you will submit one claim for each person in the group. And the answer to that is yes. Whether it's on-site or off-site, it will be one claim, and then it's just a matter of how many units are on that claim. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. So there will be one claim per person. That's all I have.
Okay. So I think between now and the office hours, we're going to be working to get a list of the frequently asked questions from today's webinar and be able to answer those questions at the office hours. In addition, we will be posting written Q&As from this webinar so that we can be really clear about some of these questions. They're great questions that you guys have been asking. Yeah.
That sounds great. And with that, I want to thank everyone for their participation. Rest assured, we have all of your questions here, and we'll work on answering them. And thank you to our state partners for their help with all of this.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.